And so are you ready, Lee? And I'll get you to introduce yourself in just a second.
Yep, I'm all set.
Yeah, so I'm happy to welcome Lee Castle, who's going to be talking about digital citizenship in your next generation learning classroom. It's always great to have people from all over the province joining us through the OTF Connect sessions, and I know that you're going to learn an awful lot from Lee tonight. She's an expert in digital learning and runs a really great website that can support your classroom, and she's a wealth of knowledge on digital citizenship. So I'm just going to turn it over to Lee.
Great, thank you. And thanks everyone for coming tonight and sharing your time with me. As Mallie mentioned, my name is Lee Castle. I currently work as a full-time teaching and learning coach with the Avon-Maitland District School Board. These are parts of my portfolio, or have been over the last few years. And what I'd like to ask you to do is just take a minute and share the grade that you're teaching this year, your teaching assignment, in the chat box, so I can just get a feel for what everyone's up to. Thanks, Mike, in grade 5. Excellent. So we've got quite a grade 3, grade 6, 7, 8. Excellent. So I think we've got full K to 8. Oh, awesome. And we have Laura from secondary. Wonderful. So we are like K to 12 today. That's fantastic. And I'm going to be calling on some of my kindergarten teachers that are here today, because some of the content may initially appear too challenging, I think, for K to 3, but I want to have some discussion around what it might look like in the primary grades, having taught primary for grade 1 and grade 2 for a number of years myself. Wonderful. Well, welcome. We're going to move right along here, and I want to start with a question to the group, and I would just like to know what your definition of digital citizenship is, or if you could add some key words to the board that really reflect what that means to you. I just want to start and see what our common, what our understanding is before we get started. So I know on the left-hand side there is a pen tool if you want to actually write, but there's also a tool to add text, so you can type on a keyboard if you're more comfortable, and that's the icon just under that one that looks like a pen. So if you want to start adding some keywords or phrases that describe digital citizenship, I'll give you maybe just a minute or two to do that. Yep, you can also put them in the chat if you want, whatever works for you. So we have accountability and innovation in the chat. And on the board, we have giving credit for work that's not your own. Absolutely. I know there are more than 3 people here tonight. Showing a positive digital identity. Absolutely. Ethics. Absolutely. Yeah, and we'll be talking about that tonight. Awareness. I'm not sure who shared that. Could you elaborate on that? What you mean by awareness? And I see some people popping in now, so welcome and thank you for joining us. We're just in the middle of sharing some of our thoughts around digital citizenship. We're adding keywords to the board or either in the chat. Technologically literate, yep. Being fluent digitally while thinking about safety and appropriate. Sorry, I have my participant box hiding that. The reflection of oneself online, absolutely. So there's a comment here on the board too about access and feeling safe. Yes, that whole healthy digital presence piece. We're going to spend some time with that a little later on. I don't know, the collective expertise in the room is pretty solid here. And thank you for those who are joining us. That's awesome. That's an excellent start. And I would absolutely agree with all of those things being said. And I think you're going to see all of those ideas represented today when and hopefully elaborated on as we go through the session tonight. So according to, I just have to move my boxes over here. According to Dr. Mike Ribble, he states that digital citizenship is more than just a teaching tool. It's a way to prepare students for a society full of technology. And I do love that quote, and I come back to that quote all the time. Digital citizenship is really about how we should act and interact with others when we're online. And of course, as already stated by some of you in the group, we're really focused on the norms of appropriate and responsible behavior with regard to technology use. So we're going to do another quick brainstorm, and this time I want you to think about why it's important to teach digital citizenship. So you can either share your ideas on the board or type them in the chat, whatever is easiest for you. Yes, we need to learn how to cite information appropriately. Future shock, that's a good one. Absolutely, and I don't even know if it's that far in the future. I think a lot of what's happening now is shocking to many. Student safety, absolutely, and responsible behavior, yes. Yeah, and good point on the board there that the internet is really that's one of our main sources of information now. And it's really important that kids understand how to navigate spaces and understand the content that they come into contact with on a daily basis. Safe collaboration, yes. Exactly, it is one of the main ways that students communicate now, and that's where they go for information. Yeah, Natasha was saying that it's involved in every aspect of our lives. Absolutely, it frames the way we work, play, learn, shop, drive. Technology is all around us. I'm just reading some of the comments on the board here. Yeah, another comment about communicating effectively. And of course, it's so important that students understand that digital footprint. Exactly, exactly. I don't know, I don't think you guys need to be here tonight. We're going to talk about all of these things in detail. So thank you for sharing your ideas there. So why we teach digital citizenship, really, I think as a group, you've done a great job framing all of the reasons why we do teach digital citizenship and why there's a need to do that. This quote really speaks to me in a number of ways. As technology immerses students in these participatory learning environments, and that goes back to what you were saying on the board about communicating and collaborating and sharing in online spaces, we want kids to participate in these spaces with integrity, and that's really important. And schools need to provide that safe space for students' guided participation in these online spaces. So just as we wouldn't teach, a teenager to drive without ever getting in a car, we can't teach digital citizenship without allowing students to go online. And that's very important in all the work that we do, especially when kids are using technology. So I want to take a minute now and Mally, if you could please play the video for slide 7. I'm going to show you a quick little video, and then we're going to talk about just why exactly we wouldn't teach someone to drive without ever getting in a car and immersing them in that space. So while you're watching the video, I want you to think about the parallels to why we would teach digital citizenship.
So I just put it in, I'm just going to put it in the chat as well. So if you're not able to see it on the screen, and it looks like it might come up yet, you'll be able to click on the link. So if it's not playing smoothly for you in the browser, you can just click on the link and it will take you right to the video. And just give a green check mark when you've finished watching, and it appears to be not playing very well in the browser right now. Yeah, it has stopped. So if you just want to click on that link again, then you can watch it. Just click on the link and it'll take you to a new browser.
It looks like most of you are finished watching the video now. Thanks, Melly. All right, I'm going to go ahead. So a very obnoxious video, but coming back to that idea that we would never teach someone to drive without ever allowing them to get in the car or only giving them a few opportunities to be in the car. And similarly, we can't teach digital citizenship without allowing students to go online. And as educators, we have a responsibility to teach students how to navigate the digital world, evaluate and reflect critically on information, respect intellectual property. I remember seeing some people talking about protecting privacy and the privacy of others, and of course, building a positive reputation and digital footprint. So, like learning to drive, it's not something that can be accomplished in a few short lessons. These experiences need to be immersive and carried out over an extensive period of time. So I believe very strongly in a one life approach to technology integration, which is really about creating a culture of innovation, risk-taking, and continuous learning while building bridges between home and school to help students develop the necessary skills to be safe and contributing global citizens. We do have a responsibility to ensure that learners are capable of building and maintaining that positive digital footprint. And this is a quote from the Ontario Ministry of Education out of their Achieving Excellence document, which is really excellent. And if you haven't read it, I strongly suggest you do. It's got a lot of great information in there about that renewed vision for education in Ontario. So in today's world, teaching digital citizenship is not optional. Digital citizenship instruction really must be entrenched in the daily conversations we have with students as they're immersed in these digital learning environments. We want them to experience ways to act and interact with others and create. Digital citizenship experience is really fundamental in providing students with the knowledge, skills, and strategies and competencies they need to be successful, not just today, but of course in the future. So Mally, if you would please paste the link to the OSAPAC link, so it's slide 11 in the chat for everyone. You don't necessarily need to go and visit this space right now, but I just want to make you aware of this framework if you haven't seen it before. And my presentation tonight is going to be framed using this model. So this is a model developed by the ministry to support Ontario educators in K through 12 with digital citizenship instruction. So this is, again, how I'm going to frame my conversation today, so you have a point of reference to return to. So the first one, the first pillar, I've called these pillars, that we're going to look at in detail is health and protection. So a digital citizen is one who implements precautions for online security, protects the privacy of self and others, balances offline and online activities, and uses devices with attention to physical and mental health. And these, again, were all ideas that you pinpointed right off the hop when we started looking at the why. So Mally, I have another video to show. If you could play the video for slide 13, you may just want to paste the link in the chat there as well. So this is a video that I think does an excellent job showcasing just how careful we need to be.
And since it didn't work before, I'm just going to
Sure.
save time and just have people click on it because it's been an issue.
Excellent. And yeah, and then if you can just give us a green check mark when you're done, we'll go from there. Okay, it looks like people are starting to finish up. Do you want to use the emoji tool to show me what you thought of that video? Or you could write in the chat. I know the first time I saw it, I'm thinking of the one on my phone where the emoji's eyes are like super wide and it's making that O face, like, oh my gosh. I love that video. And really the underlying message there, I think, which is blatantly obvious, is that we become very vulnerable when we don't pay attention to privacy and security. So what you need to know, having been on this digital citizenship journey for a number of years now, last year was really in depth for me. I was actually surprised at how many different pieces of information I needed to know as a teacher to make sure that I was not only protecting myself, but protecting my students. So if you aren't familiar with your board's administrative policies and procedures around the responsible use of technology, social media in the classroom, I'm sure you have a number of different APs that speak to online safety and security. I highly recommend that you start there. If you are with ETFO, ETFO has a series of, oh now I forget what they're called now. They're short articles basically that outline what ETFO's position is with regards to your use of electronic communication and social media, practicing caution. So there's guidelines for communication, there's guidelines around documentation, there's guidelines around videotaping in the classroom. And what you may find is that ETFO's position on the use of technology and your school board's position on the use of technology may be very different. So it is important that you know those two pieces. NISA also has a lot of great information and resources around privacy and managing data. So there's another space where you can find information. And I know OSSTF has a few, I think there are 2 bulletins, and they're referenced in the Digital Citizenship Guidebook, which I'll share with you later. Again, it's important to know what your board's policies are and what your union's policies are, because they may not be the same, and it's important that you are informed. Any questions around that particular piece? And if so, you can just raise your hand or throw something in the chat there. Okay, I'll keep going. So some tips for protecting your privacy and the privacy of others. I don't think too many of these would be new for you, but of course we want to password protect our devices. So if they are lost or picked up, we've protected our data and our information. Devices containing personal information should always be kept under direct supervision. So within the MISA video, as an example, if you are taking pictures of students on a board-owned device, technically that device needs to be left at school and should be under your supervision at all times. If you choose to take that device home with content on it that you've taken during the day of kids, for example, doing work in your classroom, and you take that device home, there is the concern that that information now may be potentially made available to someone else in your family. If you lose that device while you're out, then now you've got this personal information that could be jeopardized. So it is important to always keep your devices with you. And again, board-owned devices with student images and videos really should be kept at school. I also understand that most of the work we do requires us to take those devices home. So it's just really being aware of where your device is, what's on it, and how you're using it. So your board records, again, should be stored and retained only on school board devices. It really shouldn't be something that you're taking home, if at all possible. And email messages shouldn't contain personal information. So I know this stuff is kind of the dry stuff, and I promise I only have one more, what I'm going to call my dry slide. But knowing these things is really, really important because, again, we are dealing with student information. So as I mentioned before, knowing your board's administrative policies and procedures, especially when it comes to sharing student work on the internet, whether it's handwritten work, and especially if you are posting first and or last names, images and or videos, it is imperative that you know what your board's policies are and that you have parental permission prior to doing so. So we want to always depersonalize personal information when possible. So for example, when I run Twitter chats and we have kids tweeting from class accounts, we ask them to use their initials. So they remain anonymous, but they are still credited for their ideas when they're sharing. We always want to regularly review privacy settings, and I know this is something that I had never done myself until the last few years, but I was quite surprised to see how often privacy settings change. And privacy settings, there are always privacy policies and terms of use when using different digital tools, and it's important to check those regularly because they change often, and you are ultimately responsible for how you're using those tools, what information is in there, and then what that organization may potentially do with it. And of course, it's always good to use websites that start with HTTPS. That means it's a secure site that you're using. And if you're using a site where you are sharing information, it is important that it's safe. And of course, the one that I know we always forget, and I forget myself too, is to always log out of computers after you're done, so you don't leave it open and give someone else access to your content and material. So with regards to safety and privacy, protecting your privacy really is so important. And just to remind you of that video you just saw, it's amazing how much people are able to learn about you based on those simple little tweets or Facebook posts, those things that you share. All of that data, when put together, tells a story, and that's your digital footprint. So one of the questions I'm asked often is, how do we know which tools are safe? And I'm sure you're looking at this board thinking, I recognize some of these icons, I don't recognize others. Some of these tools will be very familiar to you. And I can say that some of these tools are absolutely safe for student use, and some of them may not be safe for student use. And there are a variety of reasons why. So one of the tools that, or resources my colleague and I created this year is, we called it a safe chart, and this was a resource we developed to support teachers and administrators in my particular school board with their vetting of apps and online educational tools. Mally, if you wouldn't mind just pasting those two links in the chat box, I am going to ask you, I'm going to give you some time just to take a look at this, and while you're looking at this, I want you to think about one of the apps or digital tools that you use all the time in your classroom. And as you're looking and working through this chart, I want you to be asking yourself if you're able to answer these questions. And I would love to give you time to go through this chart with one of your apps, but we don't have that kind of time tonight. But I am making this resource available to you to take back to your schools. And it would be great if you could sit with some teachers and use this and look at some of the apps you use. Now, this was created based on my board's administrative policies and procedures around responsible technology use. So you may find there are some things in your school board that are a little bit different, but as a general set of guidelines and key questions to ask, I think you'll find this tool really valuable. So I'm going to give you just a couple of minutes to look through it. And if you're unable to open it, then what I can do is make a link available following the recording. Mally, I'm not sure if you send out the links that are shared during the webinar.
Yeah, we do.
I can make this available. I can make this available as a PDF if you do have trouble opening it. So let me know if you have trouble in the chat, because I don't want to waste too much time if it's not possible. Okay.
And Lee, how many minutes? 3 minutes?
Yeah, let's do about 3. I think what I'm going to do now is download it as a PDF, and I'll upload it into my drive and post the link to the PDF there. And if you maybe just give me a sec, I'll do that and see if you can take a look. Okay, if you aren't able to open it, try this link, okay? Here's a new link to the safe chart. I just published it to the web, so give that one a try. I think you'll be able to view it in there. And yes, thank you, Mike, for troubleshooting that. I appreciate it. Great. I'm sorry to pull you away. I know we got in and took a look a little bit late, but I think you'll find it is a really valuable tool. It took us, I don't know, better part of a year to get that how we wanted it. And there were so many different people that consulted on that from different departments. So we're really happy with it. And these are some questions that you can ask if you do decide to take it back to your school and work with it. So choose, like I said, that app or website, review the privacy policy in terms of use, and then use that flow chart to determine whether you feel that app or website is safe. And of course, you'll notice on the chart, it is always your responsibility to check in with your admin. And then a question you can answer at the bottom, what conditions, if any, exist that would limit who could use this particular app or website? And by working through this process, you are really thinking critically about the kinds of digital tools that that kids are either asking you to use or you're asking kids to use, which is really, really important that you understand, again, that privacy piece. So I want to shift gears a little bit. We are still working in that health and protection pillar. And I want to move now to talk about self-regulation. So Stuart Shanker, if you're interested, is a distinguished research professor of philosophy and psychology at York. And he's also the CEO of a company called Merit Center. He's best known and is actually one of the world's leading authorities on self-regulation and child development. And now we're moving into that mental health piece that some of you hit on right away when we started talking about the why. And teaching self-regulated learning is something that I can honestly admit I don't think I ever did well now understanding it the way I understand it. And this one section from Linda B. Nelson's Creating Self-Regulated Creating Self-Regulated Learners really hits home for me. So study skills aren't really the point. Learning is about one's relationship with oneself and one's ability to exert the effort, self-control, and critical self-assessment necessary to achieve the best possible results, and about overcoming risk aversion, failure, distractions, and sheer laziness in pursuit of real achievement. This is self-regulated learning. Well, I know the day that I read that, I thought, wow, I completely missed the mark there. That in itself, looking at all of the different pieces there that Linda Nelson hits on, completely explodes that idea of what we're teaching when we teach self-regulated learning and how well we understand it. So within that, within the realm, I guess, of self-regulation is that whole piece around student engagement and how we use technology in a way that's positive and productive. So in addition to teaching self-regulation, we want to educate students about how to use their devices effectively, right? We want to co-create some responsible technology use guidelines and, of course, increase engagement by creating those authentic, real-life, meaningful tasks. However, we all know, and I think you've been at some point confronted with technology potentially as a problem. And really what that comes down to is that self-regulation piece. Technology addiction, and some of you again hit on that idea of mental health, is really a problem. And I would just be curious with maybe a show of check marks, how many of you would consider yourselves to be technology addicts? Be honest. I commend the first and second person. There we go. We are self-admitted technology addicts. I can't tell you how many times I catch myself picking up my phone as soon as I set it down. It's hard. It's hard to find that balance, but it's so important that we do. And one of the reasons it's hugely important is because our students see us using technology. And if we don't have a good, solid understanding of our purpose, which is why we're using technology, then it's really hard for our students to think critically and understand why they're using technology. So we need to know our why. We need to know what our purpose is. And of course, we also need to act as role models, right? If students see us on our devices all the time in the classroom, or if you're on your devices at home in front of your children, you are setting an example and they're learning that behavior from you. So it's important that we are mindful that we are also role models. And of course, I already mentioned that balance piece, making sure that you're balancing what you're doing online and what you're doing offline. So we're going to move on to the next pillar, but before we do, I just want to take a minute and ask if there are any questions around that safety and security piece. it is a big piece. It's not my favorite as far as excitement goes, but some really important information. All right, we'll keep on rolling. Okay, so presence and communication is really about how we communicate online, how we contribute to the community that we're involved in, how we communicate in the space that we're using, and of course, how we respond to issues online. And we always want to, as I always say to my students, we want to respond thoughtfully. We don't want to react in the moment, right? It's all important to respond thoughtfully. And of course, that huge big idea about developing a positive digital footprint, with which so many of you identified at the beginning of our webinar today. So a digital footprint, very simply put, is the information you leave behind about yourself every time you go online. So every time you are online, you are leaving a footprint, sometimes very tiny, sometimes quite large, depending on what you've done when you were online. And I want to speak to this quote. In the not too distant future, your digital footprint will carry far more weight than anything you might include on your resume. And I would argue that this is now. It's not in the distant future any longer. And this quote, I think, has only been out for a few years. So I would argue that it is really now, that what you do online does carry more weight. And I can tell you with absolute certainty, working with a number of businesses and organizations with the Digital Human Library, that is the first thing employers do, is Google you. And not existing online is almost as damaging as having a negative digital footprint. So I want to do another quick brainstorm here, either in the chat or on the board, whatever works for you. What do you think it means to be a good digital citizen? So if you want to share your ideas, again, in the chat or on the board, whatever works. What does it mean to you to be a good digital citizen? So some of the ideas that are popping up is treating others online as you wish to be treated. And absolutely true, right? Treat people the way we want to be treated. Doesn't matter if it's in a digital space or a real world space. Responsible and respectful. Yes, the whole idea of transparency is hugely important. And I know that that's something that that sometimes school systems struggle with, is that transparency piece, right? What's okay to share, how much to share, when to share, who to share it with. There are always lots of questions around that. Oh, and I love this point here on the board, that saying something online that you wouldn't say to someone else in person is absolutely not okay. That's right. And I'm sure a number of you have probably experienced that, where you know, hiding behind a computer screen and sharing something. And I think what I mean is that you've been on the receiving end, where someone shared something via email or through a text message that they might not necessarily have said to you had you been there in person, because there's that divide between you and the person that you're speaking with. Sharing information that's accurate, absolutely. Being aware that you were talking to a real person. That's a really interesting point, and I like that perspective, because I think we often forget that. And I see lots of those 21st century or global competencies: critical thinking, communication, collaboration, that whole idea of respect as well. Yeah, it irks me that transparency is a risky area too. We could have a sidebar conversation about that sometime. But yes, it is important. And those are all of the ideas that I'm going to hit on in the next couple slides. We want to maintain confidentiality and privacy. I just had to bring us back to that privacy piece, because it is so important. And understand that nothing that you post is ever private. Of course, there's that idea of respect, right? We want to share and respond thoughtfully, respect others. And as I said, you know, we want to make sure that we're not reactive, that we're not responding based on an emotional reaction. We want it to be a thoughtful response. And of course, when we're online, it comes back to that whole idea of participating with integrity. We want to enrich conversations, right? We want to add value to the conversation, and we want it to be something positive that's going to further promote engagement. And here's that transparency piece. We want to be transparent. We want to be honest. And, you know, one of the pieces that I remind teachers of when I'm in classrooms is that it's really important to always ask students before you take their picture. Even if you've asked them before, it shows a level of respect. And what you're also doing is you're modeling for students how important it is to be respectful and ask prior to taking pictures of people. Some of the, I think, most routine incidences of students or kids getting into trouble online, and adults too, is because someone has taken a picture of them and either they didn't know it or, you know, they were doing something that they may have preferred not be shared on the internet. So if we can model for kids to always ask before we take that picture, what we're hoping will happen is that students will think to always ask before they take pictures of their friends. Yes, even if you have their permission, absolutely. It's just, again, it's how we treat each other, right? It's just a respectful way to treat each other. So Mally, if you could paste now the link to the Copyright Matters, which is slide 34, into the chat, please, just so you have this link as a reference. So this also has come up a few times by some of you that are here tonight, the whole idea of copyright fair use and attribution. I am going to speak to this in detail a little later on, but if you aren't familiar with this resource, this is an absolutely must add to your library collection. What I love about it is that it's so user-friendly. They've actually rewritten copyright language in language that we can understand, and they've made it very simple. And this resource in particular really focuses on the kinds of copyrighted protected materials that we would use in education. So if you want to know about images, there's a section in there specifically about images. So fabulous resource, and I do hope that you take time to look at that at some point. Someone mentioned reporting inappropriate behavior. Absolutely. If we stand by and watch it happen, it's just like being that bystander during a bullying situation on the yard. So it's important that we report things that are happening online that are inappropriate and could be affecting others in a negative way. And one of the ways we participate online is in a community. And we want to encourage people to expand their learning networks, whether it's for personal or professional use. Using social media and online tools as a vehicle for communication and collaboration is really about building community. And so when you have a chance to expand your network, you have a chance to build new relationships with potentially new learning partners. So that's sort of, I think that's a pretty good summary of that presence and communication piece. And the next pillar that I'm going to dive into is critical thinking and information literacy. And this is a big one because this is really a conversation about the evolution of literacy and how we need to move into new conversations about literacy in digital learning environments. So some of these themes here will be very familiar, especially to those of you that teach language or English if you're in high school, because we teach these things in the classroom all the time. But there's a difference between what we teach in a physical space and how we do it, and what we teach and how we do it in a digital space. So as you can see here, we need to teach kids effective strategies to find information on the internet. We need to teach them how to locate and determine whether online resources are credible. And that, of course, leads right into how we evaluate the content and critically reflect on the information that we find online. And we also need to then evaluate that information in order to build new knowledge. So I'm going to come back to that idea, as I said, that literacy is in a constant state of evolution. And literacy really has always been defined by technology. So when the pencil was invented in 1574, that redefined literacy. It redefined how we communicated with each other and the mode that we used to do that. And today, the internet has really redefined and continues to redefine on a daily basis what it means to be literate. So reading and writing now more than ever is a social process, and I spoke to some of those ways we interact and how we want to interact online, again, with integrity. We want to participate online in a way that's going to add value, bring positivity, and move a conversation forward so everyone benefits. So one of the challenges I put out to teachers all the time is to ask them through what lens do you read the curriculum? And one of the challenges that I also put out there is this: what if we read the curriculum with a lens to the future? What does that look like? You know, standing by and waiting for the ministry to release a new, you know, language arts curriculum or a math curriculum or a science curriculum doesn't mean that we have to hold our students back and make them wait. If we just simply adjust the lens through which we read the curriculum, I think you'll find that the curriculum we have, in many cases, can be modernized. And here's where we come down to, I think, what really matters, and that's context. So we can continue to teach the curriculum using print text, and there is a time and a place for print text. But when the majority of time students spend reading and engaging with text in an online environment, we've completely changed the context, which means the teaching that we're doing in the classroom needs to better meet the context in which kids are learning in. I love this slide because it kind of blows my mind. And this, I think I pulled this slide's a year or two old now, so I'm not even sure what these numbers would be. But if you just take a minute and do a quick scan around, it's the internet in 60 seconds. I'll be quiet and let you read it for a sec. So each of these this slide is from, this was an image, goglobe.com is where I got it from. I can't remember, I think it's about a year or two old now. It's an image that I took from that website, goglobe.com. So each of these platforms that are listed here are learning environments, right? Each time we move to a different platform when we're online, we're changing the context in which kids are learning. And that means that the literacy skills that kids need to navigate between one platform and the next also need to evolve. And it's important that kids have experience working in different online spaces so they develop the skill sets they need. So when the platform changes or that context changes, they have the skills they need to adapt. So I want to come back to that idea of reading the curriculum with a lens to the past and reading it with a lens to the future. So it doesn't matter if you're teaching K to 12, we teach and we use narrative text. When we read with a lens to the past, we might teach inferential reasoning about setting, events, problems, solutions, characters. Our typical discussion questions might be, what do you think is going to happen next? What evidence in the text suggests this answer? So this is how we traditionally read the curriculum, and this is how we will continue to teach those foundational skills of inferring, for example. But we also need to read the curriculum with a lens to the future. And that means rethinking the context in which we are teaching the skill of inferring. So in this particular case, instead of using print narrative text, we would use informational text, such as a search engine. Almost everything you read online is nonfiction. And that's a huge difference compared to, I know, especially in primary classes, where we may use more fiction as opposed to nonfiction. So instead of a narrative text, we're going to use an informational text such as a search engine, because kids are using search engines every single day. They're not likely using narratives every single day. We would teach kids how to infer information from search results. Some of our discussion questions would include, which of these sites are commercial? What evidence in the text suggests this? Or where was this site produced? And again, what evidence do you have to suggest this? So the expectation in the curriculum is the same, but how we read the curriculum determines exactly how we're going to teach it. And both are equally important. So it's adding that new layer or next layer to what's happening in your classroom. So Mally, if you could share the link to slide 44, which I think you, oh no, you found the slide. Awesome. If you could share the link to slide 44 in the chat. So this is another resource that I'm going to share with you. I had the privilege of assembling a dream team of brilliant educators from 31 elementary schools in my system, and we came together to do some research and learning around new literacies. So what does it look like to teach online reading comprehension in digital learning environments? And I'm going to go through this fairly quickly, but you can go through and look at the resource yourself in detail. And here's where I'd love to hear from some of my kindergarten and grade 1 teachers, because what I'm going to share with you here can very easily be thought of as like this is for older kids, but in kindergarten there are lots of little pieces I think we can take out of this to start to introduce some of these ideas to our little people. So as you can see, this sketch note, thanks to Joey Jackson, who's just an amazing educator. She captured our thinking visually for us, which is beautiful. And I'm going to go through a few of these with you just to give you an idea of what teaching reading comprehension strategies look like online. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is locating information on the internet. So we need to choose keywords. We also need to choose a web browser. We need to type in keywords, and one of the tips that I share with teachers is if you're working with young children, if they type the word kid next to whatever search terms they've included in the search field, Google automatically filters any inappropriate content for you, which is kind of nice. And then, of course, there's the whole part about reading and inferring search results. So one of the examples that I give, and my kindergarten teachers, if you want to chime in the chat, I think one of the pieces we could start with here is just teaching kids how to choose keywords to search on the internet. So one of the things that if you are a language teacher, and again, even if you're not teaching language or literacy per se, these literacy skills still come into play. But as an English teacher or literacy teacher, we teach nonfiction text features, and we typically do it using print text, and there are a whole bunch of them. One of the things, though, when we talk about reading the curriculum with a lens to the future is how we teach nonfiction text features online. Now, this is one example. I did just a Google search for the word technology. So just on this search page alone, I mean, I only identified, where did I stop, 19 different nonfiction text features. And for some of these text features, again, kindergarten teachers could start with some of the more simple ones, like what an icon is, what a search field is, what that magnifying glass means, right? So there are ways that we can integrate some of these pieces into those early conversations if we have kids using technology. But even if you're teaching high school science, if you're asking kids to search the internet, one of the dangerous assumptions we make at any grade is that kids know how to do it and that they know what they're doing. So having conversations about how we search the internet and how we understand nonfiction text features online is really, really important. So I'm just going to give one example. There are multiple menus here. And when we teach table of contents in the classroom using a print text, it's that first page in the book. But on a web page, a table of contents is a menu. And on any single web page, there can be multiple menus. So there are a lot of parallels that we can make when we have those conversations, but it's important that we explicitly talk about a table of contents on a website is called a menu. And there may be more, and this is where you can find them. So that's just one example. I'm going to zip through some of these, but here's information about how to read a web address. So again, not something I would necessarily explore in kindergarten, but I know kids in my grade 1 class could read parts of a URL. And there were certain parts that they would look for that would help them determine whether or not the website would be reliable or worthwhile to visit. And one of the things I talked about earlier is the HTTP at the front. And it's not necessarily that kids need to know in detail what each of these pieces mean, but they should be able to take apart a web address to tell you what each of those sections, what they would include and where it's taking them on the internet. And I know for myself, I wasn't able to do that up until about 2 years ago, until I made it my point to actually learn how to read a web address. And all it's done for me is made me so much more efficient at searching the internet. So this is just a quick checklist. Again, this is in the resource that I shared with you. This is a quick checklist that you can use when searching the internet. So if you're locating information, each of these bullets could be taught as a mini lesson in a class on a different day. And again, there are a whole bunch of tips for searching the internet, some of which I'm sure you probably know, and some that hopefully would be new for you, so you can take that away today. So once we've been able to locate information on the internet, which having just gone through that is huge, right? Like it's not something, again, it's not something we do in 1 or 2 lessons. It needs to be immersive, and we need to be having these conversations often. So when we talk about evaluating a website, this is the next piece. So that's determining whether or not the information is relevant. And I'm sure you've all heard fake news, and there's so many resources now too online about fake news, but being able to decipher what's true and what's not true becomes increasingly more challenging. So how are we teaching kids to evaluate the sources of information that they're locating? So here's another example of a checklist, and again, this is in the resource, so you can use this, but these were some of the big ideas our team identified, or some of the big pieces that we wanted to make sure were included when we were evaluating a website. So I have a little activity for you. And on, Mally, if you could, this is the one where I need you to paste. There's a whole bunch of links for slide 52. So what Mally's going to do here is she's going to post all of these links into the chat box. And I want you to just pick one. And these are all different websites. Some of them are real and some of them aren't real. And in the resource that I shared with you, I have 2 pages of these, and I guess in the speaker notes I'll have to put down which ones are real and which ones aren't real. But I'm going to trust your abilities to evaluate some of these websites. Some of them are actually really hard to figure out. But I'm going to go back a slide so you can see the evaluating a website checklist. And I want you to just pick a site, look through it, and then just start to check it against some of these features. We're not going to take this up or discuss it too much further. I would like to hear how you found the activity, but I'm going to give you, let's say, 3 minutes again, Mally, to take a look at one of those sites and use some of the criteria here to determine whether it's okay. So I'd love to hear from you in the chat about your website and whether you thought it was real or should I say fact or fiction. And again, all of those links are in the resource I shared with you, and this is a fabulous activity to do with your kids. And I know I'll share in a bit on the Common Sense website. I think they have some really good ones for little people. You must all still be in reading your articles. All right, we'll keep going. My favorite is the feline reactions to bearded men. Did anyone pick that one? Yeah, Shona wrote the 3 I saw seemed like fakes. But again, are they fake or are they real? And are we able to provide concrete evidence to state one way or the other if it's fact or fiction? So you can play around with those. So once we found information and evaluated it, we repeat that process, right? When we're working on research, we try to grab information from a few sources, and then we need to synthesize that information. So working through that process again, and I'm just, this is again Joey Jackson sketch note, and this resource is in the, yeah, I know, being able to put that into words, right? It's really hard, and so having that checklist hopefully is really helpful. So synthesizing information, again, is a huge process, and I know for me it wasn't something that I spent enough time on with kids. So being able to organize that information, connect new learning to prior knowledge, and again, when we're looking for how to pull out some of these skills for little people, they can organize information, right? They can find those big ideas, the keywords. They can make connections between what they knew, their schema, and what some of that new learning was. That making inferences piece, again, now is becoming a little more challenging, but little people can do that, compare and contrast. They can form their own opinions. You can have conversations about things that are fact and opinion. And of course, that last piece, which is really important, and here we're back to that communication pillar, is how we communicate what we've learned. And here now is where we get into conversations about the technology that we're using, the context or those digital platforms where kids are sharing and communicating their learning. And now we're having conversations about new literacies, that critical information literacy. So as I mentioned, I'm just going to give another example of reading the curriculum with a lens to the past and reading it with a lens to the future. And both are important. We still need to teach kids, and print text has value, and there's a lot that we can do with print text. And I mean, one of the challenges about moving kids from print text into online space is that the print text that we offer them has already been vetted, right? It's a published textbook or it's an article, and we know the information is factual. Whereas when we send kids online to find information, anyone could have published it. So knowing how to find the author and work through that vetting process yourself is now a responsibility we have, and we need to teach our kids how to do that. So if we're writing with a lens to the past, we are still writing for one of the four purposes, right? To inform, explain, entertain, describe, or persuade. We would teach traditional forms of writing like maybe a haiku poem, set of directions, timeline, story, and our audience might be the teacher and students in the class, and kids typically write independently and then peer edit each other's work. And there's still a place for that. However, again, what's the balance that you're offering here? Because most kids that are reading and writing are doing so online. So if we're writing with a lens to the future, we're still writing, the purposes haven't changed. We're still informing and explaining, entertaining, describing, persuading. However, the forms of writing have evolved. And here's where we need to teach kids how to write a text message, an email, how to conduct a search on the internet, how to write a blog post, how to tweet, how to write a Facebook post. These are all things that kids are doing, and we often make the assumption that they know what they're doing. And in a lot of cases, they don't. So these are forms of writing we could be teaching in the classroom, which then show kids that what you do outside in the real world is what we do in school. We're now into that one life approach to teaching and learning. And of course, students now have that opportunity to write collaboratively in real time with others. And the most important piece, and when we talk about engagement, giving kids an opportunity to write for an authentic audience motivates and inspires such higher levels of achievement. So what does this look like in the classroom? Just this year, a team of provincial educators led by students have started OnEd Student Chat on Twitter. And if you haven't checked it out, I would encourage you to do so. It is open for students in K-12. We have 4 different chats that we offer every month. So there's Tweet and Talk, which is a live Google Hangout on air with a Twitter chat going on while that Hangout on air is happening. And we have students on panel who are talking about some of the questions. We have a Twitter chat that's specific for K-6 students. We offer 4 chats at 4 different times for students in grades 7 to 12 to accommodate a secondary schedule. And then we also have a slow chat going on all month. So here's an opportunity for your kids to work in a literacy-rich learning environment where they're connecting and communicating with an authentic audience, writing for one of the purposes, using a new form of writing. So if I haven't sold you, I don't know what else to do. Aside from the fact that this chat is run by students, led by students, all the topics and questions are created by students, it truly does value and honor and empower student voice. So one of the other ways we can explore new literacies in the classroom is by providing a question about the Twitter chat. If students are 13 or over, with parental permission, they can sign up for their own Twitter accounts, but that, again, is up to the classroom teacher. What I suggest for students in K-8 is that the class teacher set up an account and all of the students tweet from that account and identify themselves using their initials. So all the information that you would need about the Ontario Ed student Twitter chat is on our website. we have a whole series of how-tos and hopefully we've answered all of your questions there, but I'm happy to follow up with you also if you have additional questions. So one of the ways we can engage kids in a new platform for one of the purposes of writing to, again, connect with an authentic audience, document their learning, develop some of those 21st century digital skills that we talk about, establish a positive digital footprint, integrate technology in a meaningful way with a focus on literacy, and of course, that documentation as assessment for, of, and as learning is using blogs as digital portfolios. I've done a whole session on blogs as digital portfolios, and if you're looking for a platform to engage kids in those critical information literacy and develop some of those new literacies and, again, 21st century competencies, exploring blogs as digital portfolios I highly recommend it. So here are some questions to consider. I'm just going to move on to the next section, but if that's something you're interested in, I do hope you'll come back to this slide. And again, I've done a full session on digital portfolios here, and I have tons of information on my site if you want to learn more. So that was a very quick flyby of critical information literacy, of that pillar. But again, that pillar in itself is huge. And these 3 pillars I've covered so far fall under that larger umbrella of digital citizenship. So the last one we're going to look at tonight is creation and credit. And this comes back to, again, some of the ideas you shared earlier about how we respect intellectual property, how we use digital resources responsibly, how we give credit to the creators of content, and that whole idea around copyright. And we're going to come back to the resource that I shared earlier that Mally put the link in the chat box there. So this really is a must-read, and here's an example of one of the sections from Copyright Matters that speaks to how students and teachers can use works that are already copyright protected. So as you can see here, it's written in plain English. It's simple and easy to follow. And I want to give you now some concrete examples of how teachers and students are using works that may potentially be protected. I'm sure you recognize Success Kid. He is all over the internet. I actually Googled him today because I was curious to see how many versions of this image have been created. And today there are over 12 million, which is just mind-blowing to me. So one of the things that we routinely ask our kids to do, and that they're doing on their own, is they're going online and they're grabbing pictures. And they're using pictures for all sorts of things. Sometimes they just want to use the image, and sometimes they want to modify the image. And when they make changes to an image they find online, we call this remixing. And this is based on Doug Belshaw's concept. He came up with that idea of remixing and explains that we're developing those new digital literacy skills by remixing other people's work. So if you're open to creating content and sharing it online and having people adjust it and modify it and remix it, there's lots of really cool things that can be created. And when we talk specifically about images and changing images, we refer to these as memes. And I'm sure you've seen lots of memes before. Cat ones are hugely popular. I have lots of great funny cat ones. In my new literacy session, I go through quite a few examples of memes, but these are some of the funny ones. I hope you're laughing alongside as you watch. So these are things that kids want to do, and here we are back to, this is what kids are doing in real life. They're finding images online, they're modifying them, they're remixing them, and making them their own. And there's no reason why we can't teach this back in the classroom. So how do we do that? Well, one of the ways we can find content online that we are allowed to use is through Creative Commons. Creative Commons essentially applies a filter to a search that you'd be doing in Google Images. So one of the things that I suggest to people here, now you can use Creative Commons to apply that filter to photo sharing sites like Flickr and Pixabay. Those are 2 really popular ones. And all it does is filter out images that are protected by copyright that you aren't allowed to use. A simpler way, in my opinion, to search the internet, since most of you are probably, and most of your students are probably searching Google for images, is to actually use the built-in search tools in Google. So if you go into Google, and I'm just watching the time, and I wanted to give you some time to do this, but I want to get through a few other slides first. So I hope that you do take some time and come back to this slide. But in Google, if you type in a search term, so I was looking for pedagogy, and I went to Google Images, you'll notice a menu come up across the top, and one of the items in the menu is search tools. And if you want to do this while I'm talking, you can take a look. If you click on the search tools button underneath the search bar, you'll notice that another menu pops up, submenu underneath that menu, and you're going to see that one of the tabs is usage rights. When you search through Creative Commons, what you're actually doing is searching Google, applying the search tool labeled for non-commercial reuse with modification, which means you can reuse the image as long as you're not going to sell it, and you can modify it however you want. So the images that now come up in that search you are allowed to use. And this is how we want kids to start searching the internet for content. So what does that look like in the classroom? So I had mentioned memes, and I want to share a couple examples that were done by some intermediate students. These are some of my favorites. So kids searched the internet, they used the search tools, they found images they were allowed to reproduce, or reuse and remix, and that's exactly what they did. And you'll notice as well on the top hand corner here, there's an attribution, and I'm going to get to that piece next. So here, this is my favorite. And I'm hoping you're all laughing in the background. So, and of course, kids are sharing these on their blogs so other people can see their amazing things. Thanks, Jonah. Can see their amazing work. And of course, when kids become really fluent at working with images and remixing them and turning them into memes, they can transfer their skills and ideas into new contexts for new purposes and remix things in different ways. So they're still using the same technology, and they're still developing those literacy skills, but again, it's the application of now. So now instead of sorry, I'm going to keep going here. So the next piece that I want to speak to is that whole idea around attribution. And this is where we give credit to the creators of content. And one of the important pieces I want to mention here is that our students are creators of content. So they should be attributing anything they share online that they've created. And an attribution really, quite simply, has the title of the image, if it's available, which is hyperlinked to the image itself where it was originally found online, if possible, and the author's name. And if there is a CC license provided, the CC license would appear there. So on the actual image on the screen, you'll see in the bottom left-hand corner is the attribution to that photo, but underneath I've blown that up for you so you can see those three parts. So again, the three parts are title of the photo, hyperlinked to the original photo on the internet, the name of the author, and then if there is one, a CC license. And that's it. And teaching kids how to do that is now teaching them to respect the content they find online created by others, and also then take credit for the work that they too are also sharing online. So one of the cool features or resources that I found online is a Creative Commons tool that allows you to create that CC license for your work, because that, I think, for many people, and I know myself as well, seems kind of daunting, and I didn't understand what all the letters meant. If you just Google Creative Commons, you can find that CC information. It's also in the resource that I shared with you. So if you go to this Creative Commons website, and the link is just at the bottom there, I think Mally has it too, it's for slide 74. You can actually click three simple buttons, and the CC license that you would need to add to your own image is presented to you. So it's click, 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 and now the license has been created. So if you want to add that CC license and you want your students to add that license to their work, this space takes all the guesswork out and makes it really easy and user-friendly. So I'm going to start to wrap things up here because we are sadly running out of time. The meat and potatoes now. All of this is great. However, I need lessons. I need ideas to teach this content. So good thing I have a resource to support you with that. So Mally, if you wouldn't mind putting the links to slide 76 in the chat. One of the biggest projects I worked on last year was writing the Digital Citizenship Guidebook for our system. And my colleague Lisa Bruce and I created a digital citizenship resource matrix. There are so many lessons online, and there's so much content. Sifting through it is overwhelming. And so what we did is we looked at 3 resources out of hundreds, and we narrowed it down to OSAPAC's Digital Citizenship Framework, which I've used to frame the webinar tonight, Media Smarts, which is a Canadian resource, and some of you may prefer to use something that is Canadian, and then Common Sense Media, that is American, but they have a whole wealth of resources, and the Ontario curriculum. What you'll notice is that OSAPAC, Media Smarts, and Common Sense Media, just like the 100 other websites we looked at, set everything up very differently. So what we tried to do with this resource matrix is organize it for you under the 4 pillars in a way that makes sense. So if you're looking for resources around critical information literacy, when you go to the matrix, you'll see how we've organized the content on OSAPAC, Media Smarts, and Common Sense to streamline those resources for you. So hopefully you find that useful. And the last piece of my session tonight is just framing how we teach with technology. And I'm hoping that the SAMR model is familiar to some of you, and maybe you can give me a green check mark if it is. SAMR is just a way of thinking about how we integrate technology into our classroom. I'm glad to see some green check marks flying up there. SAMR is an acronym. The S stands for substitution. And so that's when we're using technology as a straight substitution. So what my kids could do with paper and pencil, I am now substituting with an iPad, and I'm going to ask them to type in a Google Doc. The A of the SAMR is about augmentation. So how is the technology that you're using augmenting the lesson slightly? So now, if kids are writing in a Google Doc, I could ask them to use the comment feature and leave comments for each other. So now I'm using technology in a way that augments what I would have done with paper and pencil, because I can't actually do that any other way. I have to use the technology if I want them to be able to leave back and forth comments in the Google Doc. The M of SAMR is modifying the activity or the lesson that you've included. So under modification, kids are now working in a Google Doc. Maybe now they're writing collaboratively in that Google Doc, and they're using the chat feature on the side, and maybe they're using the built-in web search feature in Google Docs to search the internet and do some research. So I've now modified the task with technology in a way that I couldn't do with paper and pencil. And the final stage is redefinition. So this is where we completely redefine the learning task in a way that couldn't have been otherwise conceived without technology. So now I have classes in a Google Hangout collaborating around the paper that they collaboratively wrote, providing descriptive feedback to each other, using the feedback function, searching the internet within that Google Doc to do their research. I mean, I could go on and on. There's so many ways we can leverage that technology to completely redefine what we're doing. What's interesting about the SAMR swimming pool is that we aren't aiming for redefinition every time. We want to be able to swim back and forth between how we're using technology to augment, modify, and redefine the task. We have to really understand, and this comes back to knowing your why. TPAC is another framework, and I'm not going to spend time speaking about this, but if you're familiar with SAMR, I would like to encourage this as your next step. This framework is much more in-depth, and it talks about the balance between the knowledge we have, the content knowledge we have, the knowledge of pedagogy, and the technological knowledge, and how we balance those 3 pieces, and that we don't always need to integrate technology, right? We have to understand our why. So this would be my suggestion as a next step. So we're coming back to that one life idea, or one life approach to teaching and learning. So the difference between school and life: in school you're taught a lesson and then given a test. In life you're given a test that teaches you a lesson. So I want to again reinforce the why, really understanding the why you're using technology, and also looking for ways to integrate student voice into that equation. Ask your kids. They need to understand the why just as much as you do, and I think what you're going to find is that kids want to see technology used in schools that is real life. This was a slide I put out earlier in the year on Twitter, and when I first read it, I was like, wow, by 2020, that's a lot of jobs. And then it occurred to me that's like only 3 years from now, and it's not even 3 years from now, it's like 2 years from now. And it's not just basic technology skills like being able to send email and create a PowerPoint. These are advanced technology skills. And the article is referenced at the very bottom of the screen if you want to read it, but it's scary to think the extent to which kids are required to be digitally literate. And then when we look at what we're doing in schools, are we really preparing them for the workforce and for life outside of school? So one of the considerations I would ask you to make is to think about what kind of tools you're using in the classroom and whether or not they're cool tools for school, and some of these are amazing tools for school. Explain Everything is a digital tool that I would continue to use again and again. But I want you to go back and think about what tools you're using that are specifically designed for school. Because if they're designed for school, it means they're not real life. And this is that age-old question asked from students, right? How is this real life? How is this, why should this be important to me? And if we start to look at some of the other tools that we use and outsource those real-life tools, our next challenge is to find that balance, right? How are we integrating tools that are real life into the classroom, intermixed with some of those cool tools for school? Because some of those cool tools are really, really valuable. But if we want to create, again, that idea of that one life approach, what kids are doing outside of school, we want to see happening inside of school. There are so many incredible educational tools, which I'm showing you right here, that we could be using more often with kids, so school is more real life. And this is the why, right? Will Richardson nailed it here. You know, how can we make sure that every student who walks on graduation day is well Googled by his or her last name? And it comes back to that idea of a positive digital footprint, and that footprint will carry more weight than your resume. So some questions to ask before integrating digital tools. Start with backwards design. So again, the same incredible article I read when I was doing my BEd, 16, 17 years ago, starting with backwards design. What do we want students to know? And ask them, right? What do you want to know? What do you want to understand and be able to do? What's our purpose? And then what are you going to accept as evidence of that learning, of that understanding? And what knowledge and skills will students need to achieve the desired results? And then it's how we continue the conversation, especially when we start asking how we're going to integrate and why we're integrating digital tools. Are we going to be able to augment, modify, or redefine the learning, right? Or is this a straight substitution? Do we even need the technology? How will it help kids learn? What's the role of the learner? Is their voice involved? Do they have choice? And how will tech empower students to take control of their own learning? That's another way to frame and think about what you're doing in the classroom. And how will the tech integrated experience build 21st century competencies? So that piece specifically speaks to those tools that are real life. How are kids using social media in the classroom? Are we teaching them new forms of writing, like blog posts and tweets and email? And how will the tech broaden student perspective and encourage broader community participation? How is the tech integrated experience real life? And how will you overcome unforeseen challenges, which happen all the time? So we have come to the end, and I want to open it up for questions as well, but I also wanted to ask, out of all of those big ideas that were shared tonight, what resonated with you the most? So if you want to share your ideas in the chat or on the board, we've got about just under 10 minutes left. Whether it's a question, again, or something that resonates with you, I'd be happy to speak to any and all of it. I'm glad the new literacy piece was something that resonated with you. I don't know if you're going to the BIT conference in Niagara Falls the first week of November, but I am doing a half-day workshop on new literacy, so there'll be lots of hands-on working with different digital tools, creating memes, for example, and really diving into what some of those new literacies look like. Yes, the video on mind reading is one of my favorites. And you know what? I absolutely think you should show it to kids. I think it's brilliant because I know it really made me think differently about what I share, and I've never forgotten that video, right? It's one of those things that you have that emotional connection to, and you remember it. Yes, real life tools, so important, so important. I'm glad that was something that resonates with you. Yeah, you know, I think that's a great question. I was just reading, I'm teaching online text features. I mean, I didn't know all of those online text features that I showed you on that crazy slide with, I mean, there was like 19 or 20, and I didn't even list any of the ones that are on a website. There's so many different text features online. It would be great to know, to see what the kids know and how many they're able to learn. I'm glad the mind reading video was so popular tonight. Yes, and fake websites. Will you do another session on changing our idea of what knowledge is? Could you elaborate on that, Natasha? It sounds really interesting. Oh, yes, Nicole. Yes. So Nicole's comment is having a hard time getting grade 3 students to understand making a contribution, actually adding to online discussion. One of the activities, actually, Nicole, I did in my classroom with my kids around that was I had a ball and I had 2 kids at the front of the room, and what I did was I asked them to play a game of catch. And what I was showing them with that game of catch is that the one student wasn't allowed to throw the ball to the other student unless the other student indicated that he wanted the ball. So I'm not explaining this very well. Let me try that all over again. So through using a game of catch, what I'm trying to explain to you is that you have to teach kids how to explicitly have a conversation online. So for example, with the ball, if I post something online and share something, I could throw the ball to my partner. My partner then has several options. He can read my post and not respond, which means the game of catch ends. My partner could say, hey, that's really cool. But again, there's nothing to continue the conversation, so the ball does not get thrown back. Or my partner could share something he or she knows or ask a question. And if kids share something they know, then there's reason to throw the ball back and continue the game of catch, because now the person that's received the ball has new information, and that person needs to decide what they're going to do with that new information. Am I going to comment on it? Am I going to ask a question about it? Am I going to share something else that I know? So if a question is asked, that also continues the game of catch, because now the other person has something that they have been asked to do. So using just that visual of throwing a ball back and forth to show how a conversation is bounces from one person to the next and is back and forth, but requires something from each of the individuals. Hopefully I explained that well enough, but basically what I say to my kids is that if you want someone to know that you're out there, you have to actually tell them you're out there. If you want them to talk to you, you have to then either give them more information to think about or ask them a question. And if you don't, the conversation stops. So hopefully that was helpful. I'm glad you like the ball idea. That means I didn't completely botch it. It is 9 o'clock at night and I'm just as tired, I'm sure, as the rest of you. I'm just reading through some of the other comments here. Yeah, you know what, the assumption, that whole assumption piece, we assume so much. We assume that because our child can pick up an iPad and open an app and play a game that they know what they're doing. And I mean, that's where, you know, app developers have been hugely successful because they've made their apps so intuitive that anyone can figure them out. But if you actually ask a child to explain to you how they got from A to B to F to Z, they might not be able to explain that. And having them explicitly make connections and know, for example, that when I visit a social media website, if I need to log in, chances are I'm going to find that in the top right-hand corner of the screen. If I'm going to a website and I'm looking for a menu, chances are it's going to be at the top of the page because that's where I always find it. And then extending that conversation to have kids make connections between different web platforms to see, is the login always in the top right? Is the menu always at the top? If I want to subscribe to a website, where do I usually find that information? And maybe it's at the bottom. So on that level of conversation, students are learning how to be more efficient consumers of content. But we want to move from students being consumers of content to students creating that content. And when kids learn how to make those explicit connections and they really learn how to understand where information is found on a website, for example, when you then ask a child to create their own blog or build their own website, they're now thinking about their experience as a user, as a consumer of content, and they're thinking about how that can apply now that I'm the creator of content. So when I'm building my blog or my website, I want to make sure that my search bar is in the top of the screen because that's where I always find the search bar. My subscribe is always at the bottom. You know, my flag counter is in the footer. Kids start to recognize those patterns, and being able to identify those patterns, again, as a consumer of content, helps you find information and evaluate it more efficiently. But then as a creator of content, it helps you understand
so thankfully, I'm
what it's like
going
to
to
use
put
your
your
space
contact
from a
information
user's
if
perspective.
people want just to continue the conversation, just to be respectful of your time and everybody else who's been. It's late. So that was a great session. I learned a ton
absolutely.
and know how important it is to be you know, really modeling and explicitly teaching some of these skills with the kids. So just in closing, and I'll do this really quickly. So there's a couple of things from the OTF side. If the first one, and most importantly from in our perspective, is if you could please fill in the survey form to provide Lee and OTF Connects with some feedback. There's 3 ways in which you can do this. The first one is when you log out of the website, it will take you directly to the survey, and if you do that, then once your survey is complete, it will enable you to download a certificate for your professional portfolio. The second is by clicking on the link in the chat box, and the third will to complete the survey with when you receive the follow-up email tomorrow. I'm just going to stop